See everyone here on this Lord's Day. I'm glad that we're able to come together as a family to worship and to sing and to, at this moment, just be fed by Him, by His Spirit, and by the Word of God. And so, with that said, if I could kindly ask everyone to please stand, please rise for the reading of God's Word. We're continuing along in our series in the book of Philippians, and our passage this morning comes from the end of chapter 1, verses 27 to 30. Philippians 1, 27 to 30. Please give your undivided attention to the reading of His holy word. Only let your manner of life be worthy of the gospel of Christ, so that whether I come and see you or am absent, I may hear of you that you are standing firm in one spirit, with one mind, striving side by side for the faith of the gospel, and not frightened in anything by your opponents. This is a clear sign to them of their destruction, but of your salvation, and that from God. For it has been granted to you that for the sake of Christ you should not only believe in him, but also suffer for his sake, engaged in the same conflict that you saw I had, and now hear that I still have. This is the reading of the word. Please take your seats. 2 weeks ago, we saw how in the earlier verses of chapter 1 that the Apostle Paul himself sort of led us into his life and his heart as a minister, as an apostle, and as well as a prisoner under Roman house imprisonment. And he shared essentially how the gospel has saturated and penetrated his life and heart, and how his thinking and his goals and motives were thoroughly undergirded by what Jesus has done for him. But he was able to, in this sense, face the uncertainty of life and death, the ability to face the uncertainties of ups and downs in life. And as he did so, we see that he was able to approach these sort of situations with a sense of calm, cool, collectedness, even a sense of joy, because he says he rejoices whether he lives or dies. And we looked at that 2 weeks ago in terms of how he was able to do this, and it really centered upon verse 21 of chapter 1, which we all know. It says, "For to me to live is Christ, but to die is gain." And that's how he was able to do this, as he sort of extrapolated and really saturated his life in this, that his identity and his life was fully grounded in the gospel of Jesus for him. In our passage here this morning, as Paul transitions now to the end of chapter 1, Paul moves with a similar theme, but he moves from himself to the church. Now, his purview is not so much inward as now it is more upward and outward. But he has the same sort of idea, the same sort of conviction to convey to the cross or convey to the church, that in the cross of Jesus, you also, church, may be able to face the difficulties and the setbacks of life, but then you will also be able to handle it with a sense of cool and calm resolve and joy. And we see that in the opening verse, in verse 27. This is what the Apostle Paul says. He says, "Only let your manner of life be worthy of the gospel of Christ." And that word there, "only," shows that Paul has an unwavering expectation of the church. He says, "Only let your manner of life." It's an unwavering expectation, or as the theologian called Barth has said, he paraphrased that word as just one thing. And sort of the tone and the sort of feel of that word is as if somebody lifts up their finger and weighs it like a warning, not in a condescending way, but as a way to emphasize the importance. So it's almost as if somebody comes and says, "Only let your manner of life be worthy of the gospel," because it's an emphatic focus of what the Apostle Paul is trying to get across. And even from the beginning, from verse 27, he says he's trying to move the center of gravity of our lives from self-centrism to Christ-centrism. That's how you live a manner worthy of the gospel of Christ, that the center of gravity of your life moves from yourself and towards Jesus Christ himself. And he says essentially that the world does not revolve around you, but rather your lives revolve around Jesus. That's how you begin to live a life worthy of the gospel of Jesus Christ. That the worthiness of your life is not dictated by yourself or your achievements, but dictated by the person and work of Jesus. Friends, all of us want a worthy life, don't we? You want a life that's relevant, that has purpose, that has dignity. You want a life that has great merit and a great sense of belonging. You want that in your life, whether you're young or whether you're old. You want a life that matters, a life that is worthy. And Paul understands that, and he says, this is how you're going to get it. This is how you will live and get a worthy life, live a worthy life to such a degree that you would always feel significant but humble, that you would always feel confident yet have a sense of humility, that you wouldn't be prideful but you also wouldn't be sort of self-deprecating, that you would have the perfect harmony and balance of one at the same time being humble and yet confident, being confident and yet humble. That's how you can face the adversities of your life. And he's giving us a secret into this. He understands that this is what we want. He understands that we want a life of significance and worthiness, and he's saying this is what's unique and particular to the Christian faith. This is what the gospel can give to you like nothing else in the world can. And he speaks directly into this Roman culture at Philippi. And he says, in the Roman culture, there are different ways and different achievements and different accomplishments by which people feel worthy. But he's speaking directly into that. And he's saying, this world has a different paradigm of how they understand sort of significance and worthiness. But Paul is saying there is something that usurps that. There is something that transcends what the Roman culture and really the Roman worldview sort of entails. And he says, this is how you may live a worthy life, a more worthy life than what the Roman culture will dictate and define to you. And that's what we're going to take a look at. Because the Roman culture is not really much different from our culture today. And if you want a worthy life, you want a life of purpose, significance, relevance, you want something that's meaningful to you in the day in, day out, week in, week out of life, Paul's saying this is what you ought to do. And there are 3 points to this worthy life that we'll consider here today. And this is what he says. First, you want a worthy life, live as a citizen of heaven. Secondly, you want a worthy life, live as a soldier of heaven. And then third, this is how you can grow in it. This is how you'll be able to do it practically. So how do you live a worthy life here today? Paul doesn't say, get as much education as you can, earn as much money as you can, let's try to schmooze with the high and almighty as much as you can. But he says, you want a eternal, significant life that'll never fade away? Live 1 as a citizen, live 2 as a soldier, and 3, that's hard to do, but I'm going to tell you how you can do it. It'll be easy for you. And this is where we're headed. So point number 1, live as a citizen. Live as a citizen. So you don't see that word explicitly in our passage, but it's there very clearly in verse 27. Verse 27 says, let your manner of life be. Only let your manner of life be worthy. But that phrase, let your manner of life be, is actually one word in the Greek where we get the core word citizen. That's where we see this sort of idea and concept, verse 27. See, normally, Paul, when he talks about the Christian life, uses the metaphor of walking. This is how you ought to live and behave, the metaphor of walking, moving from point A to point B. That's his metaphor. But here, Paul changes it up, and that's why it's significant, because rather than using the word for walk, he uses the word for citizen. That's what he says. And this time, we see here, that word for city, which is polis, is where we get the word politics. And that word essentially means this: to behave in a way that enhances the reputation of your city. In other words, live in a way that makes your city proud. Live in a way that gives the best reputation from the city that you're from. So in some sense, Paul is saying this: let your citizenship, or let your politics, reflect the city that you're from. How do you live a worthy life? Let your politics, let your citizenship reflect the city that you're from. See, friends, this is a big deal for the people at Philippi. You know why? Because in Rome, citizenship was for the privileged elite. Not everyone had Roman citizenship. It was for the city's leading families and their cultural elite. And for most people under Rome's government, including the city of Philippi, citizenship was simply out of reach. It wasn't for everyone. It was only for the upper class, so to speak. But it was something that everyone understood and everyone wanted. Everyone wanted this citizenship. It was sort of an insignia that you were part of an important class. There were tax benefits that came from Roman citizenship. There were legal benefits in terms of due process that came with Roman citizenship. And even though Philippi was 100 miles away from Rome, it was very much defined and identified by Rome. That every citizen understood in Philippi what the significance of being a Roman citizen entailed. They wanted it, because they wanted to belong to something greater than themselves. And Paul is speaking into that. And he's saying that your identity and your citizenship is not in Philippi. Your citizenship is not ultimately in Rome. Your citizenship is in the heavenly city of Jesus Christ. Because you see, friends, everyone's searching for a belonging or a citizenship. Everyone wants to belong to something greater than themselves, a sense of self-worth, a sense of purpose and value, meaning in life. You want to feel important or accepted and loved. Everybody wants that. And for Philippians, for the church of Philippi, on some level, it was to be a citizen of Rome. That's what they wanted. And Paul speaks into that and says, the Roman citizenship is fine, but there's a greater citizenship that instills greater value in your life, greater significance and importance than Roman citizenship, and it's heavenly citizenship. See, if I stretch this idea a little bit, and I'll try to stick with me, we can recognize that all of life has this sort of idea of citizenship, that you want to belong to something greater than yourself. Isn't that true? I stretch it a little bit. That's why people love to belong to secret societies. That's why people would desire to be part of an elite organization, that you want to be part of clubs and associations. That's why even at church or even in life, there are cliques, and you always hear these sort of vernacular or verbiage, there's an in crowd and there's an out crowd. Well, why is that? Because there's a citizenship in the in crowd in this church, and there's a citizenship or uncitizenship of being of the out crowd. So everybody has that sort of dynamic if you stretch it. Even some of the questions that we discuss or share with one another sort of entails this idea of being part of an elite group, doesn't it? What sort of school did you graduate from? What do you do for a living? What part of town do you live in? There's a good part of town and there's not so good part of town. Who do you hang out with? Who's on your speed dial? This is why people love to name drop, because if you start name dropping important people, it says you are a citizen of an elite group. You are important. You have a relevance. You hang out with those who are in a position of power. So you name drop very smoothly about the people you hang out with and are part of your clique. We all want this on some level. And depending on your answer, friends, you sort of feel in this sort of like pendulum that if you belong to elite citizenship, that you feel confident and secure, that you feel in some sense important. But if you feel excluded from these citizenships, then you feel insecure, you feel desperate, you feel disgruntled. You may feel content and fulfilled if you belong to this group, but if you may feel empty and frustrated if you're excluded from this group. You may feel like a somebody, or you may feel like a nobody. Isn't that the case? Be accepted. You are a somebody because you hang out with somebodies, but you are a nobody because you have nobody to hang out with. And this is where the beauty of the gospel and what Paul is saying is so important. You know why? Because the gospel speaks into that sort of dynamic even for us today. Because in Jesus, we have been made citizens of heaven. That Jesus, who was a somebody, he was a somebody of somebodies, he became a nobody to make nobodies like us a somebody. He was the ultimate insider, in other words. He became an outsider to make outsiders like us ultimate insiders. If I could stretch this, if I could use this sort of noun like a verb, Jesus somebodied us in our nobodiness. Does that make sense? He was the ultimate somebody of somebodies. He was the king of all citizens who became an exiled alien to naturalize all of us to be citizens of this kingdom. And Paul is telling us to live according to that reality, that we have been made a heavenly people, now live a heavenly life. That's why the ultimate significance and importance for your life is not going to be how much money you make or how education that you get or sort of family and connections that you have. It doesn't matter who's your sort of connection on LinkedIn. It just simply matters that at the end of the day, in your heart of hearts, you have been made a somebody by Jesus Christ. You became a nobody for you, so that you have been naturalized as a citizen of heaven, in the heavenly Jerusalem that has come for you. And that is your ultimate identity that can never be taken away. This world, friends, as good as it is not your home. Now, I don't know about you, but I'm not a big fan of camping. I think I shared that before. I'll go a couple of days, but not really hardcore camping where you have to actually find your own food and cook it and just sleep in a tent. I like camping where there's a nice 4-star hotel nearby, just go out and fish in the stream and whatnot. But if you've ever gone camping, you enjoy it, but after a while, you sort of long to be back home, don't you? Camping's fun with the people and the activities, but you sort of want to go back to the comfort of your own home and bed and your bathroom and your technology and internet. And so in some sense, that's sort of the metaphor of how we live life here, that we're sort of camping in this world. That we're camping here, but there should be a longing to our real home as citizens in heaven. But Paul Tripp says, and he extrapolates, and he elaborates on this idea, and he says, the problem with us is as we camp out our lives in this world, we have become too comfortable and have confused this camping ground as our actual home. We don't necessarily rough it, realizing that our center of identity and gravity is in heaven, but rather we come here camping and we bring our six-figure salaries, or we bring our million-dollar RVs, and we bring all the comforts of our home and try to plant our permanence in this world. But he's saying that's not really who we are. We are resident aliens, according to 1 Peter, that our ultimate identity and place of home is not here, but he says, the Apostle Paul does, let your citizenship be worthy of the gospel of Christ, because your identity is from Jesus and in the city to come. That is our home. That is our identity. That is how we've been naturalized. And Paul says, you want to live a worthy life? Live as citizens from heaven. And you're thinking, well, what does that really mean? How do you do that? Well, there's a lot of ways to do this, but this brings us to point 2, because he focuses on one point. He says this: you want to live a worthy life as a citizen of heaven? He says, this is more clearly how you can do it. Live as a soldier. Isn't that funny? Point 2, live as a soldier. See, Paul brings into view this military imagery, this metaphor of combat, when he says, essentially in verses 27 to 28, standing firm in one spirit, striving side by side, not frightened by your opponents. In other words, to live as a soldier of heaven, you need to live in unity and you need to live in courage. Now, how do you live a worthy life? Live as a citizen of heaven. How do you live as a citizen of heaven? Live as a soldier. How do you live as a soldier? Live in unity as an army, but also live in courage. And Paul focuses emphatically on unity in verse 27. You see that in the verse there. It says, in one spirit, in one mind, striving side by side. Spirit here is most likely a reference to the Holy Spirit, because that's how Paul uses the word later when he says participation in the Spirit. And he says this is the Holy Spirit because that word there is how he translates or uses the word every other time in the New Testament, Holy Spirit. He's saying this unity in the church is made possible and is protected by the Holy Spirit. That the unity of the church is how you live as a soldier, and it is Holy Spirit empowered and protected. Dennis Johnson, in his commentary, says it this way: God's Spirit is the powerful protector in whom Christ's soldiers stand strong, and the Spirit is the divine guardian of our soul and mind. And Paul is saying, live in unity because this Spirit, who is the protector of us as an army, and the Spirit, which is the divine guardian of our soul and mind, is why we have the power and the protection to live a worthy life as a citizen of heaven, as a soldier. And in this Holy Spirit unity, we strive with one mind, side by side. That we are together with arms linked in with one another, moving forward for the sake of the gospel. And the root word there for striving side by side sometimes refers to athletic competition. See, the birthplace of the Olympics happened a little bit south of Philippi in the city called Achaia. And so Paul may be able to speak into that context here when he says striving side by side, because there's an athletic metaphor, a military metaphor. Because in ancient Greek, athletic competition developed from military training for combat. That's why if you look at some of the Olympic sports, they're sort of like military combat. That's why you have sports like the javelin, or you have the hammer, or the discus, or even wrestling sort of developed out of this hand-to-hand combat. And Paul paints a really clear picture here of Mortal Kombat, and he's saying that you are an army protected and united by the Holy Spirit with one thinking, one purpose, driving side by side like a legion or army. That's why you ever see those movies about Navy SEAL training and they go arm in arm, locked in, and they walk into the cold water of the ocean? That's the imagery that you got to think about. You could even do it literally if you want to, but lock yourselves arm in arm with one another, going out into the coldness of the ocean. Or if you've ever seen the movie 300 with the Spartan army, you see that one of the key ways in terms of their strategic warfare is that they formed a line, a phalanx, that linked one another so that they were an impenetrable unit. And that's what the Apostle Paul is playing on. He's saying striving side by side, using this sort of idea that there's an Olympic game that grew out of sort of military combat. And he's saying that is the metaphor for the church. You want to live a worthy life, you want to live as a citizen of heaven, live as soldiers in a phalanx of the Holy Spirit, moving forward for the propagation of the gospel. That's what the Apostle Paul says. The church is like this. And it's humbling because Paul is saying, you see this, you do the same. Arm in arm, stay together, keep united. Put your personal agenda aside behind you, because for Paul, the church ought to advance forward in unity as citizen soldiers to spread the gospel. And friends, this is why here at New Life Mission Church, we take very dearly to heart what our vision and our mission statement here is at church. Because we want everyone to understand what we're about here at this church so that together, arm in arm, we can move forward with a like-mindedness, a same purpose, in order to share the gospel with each other and the world out there. That our vision is essentially to renew lives in Orange County and the surrounding areas by teaching, learning, and living out the historic Christian truths of the gospel. We want to do that. That's our goal. That's what we're moving towards. And we have a way, a methodology, a biblical undergirding in order to accomplish that. So that's why I encourage everyone. I sent this out to the church, our presentation from the town hall, which encapsulates what we're trying to do this year in terms of our goals. Why are we trying to set up a multimedia committee? Why are we trying to start community groups? Why do we want to develop a discipleship culture? It's because we are the Spartan 300, encapsulated and protected by the Holy Spirit, moving forward for the sake of the gospel, so that we can renew lives in Orange County with the historic Christian truths of the gospel. That is what we're trying to do. And we want everyone to know this, so that it can be of the same minds, driving side by side. And we want to do this with a sense of courage. Because in verse 28, it says, without fear or trembling. And that word there really is a sense of terror. But that word for fear in 28 is really where you get the sense of horses being startled and they're stampeding away. So he's saying, as you guys are locked arm in arm, do this without fear, without fear. Paul is saying, citizen soldiers of heaven have no need to fear. And Paul doesn't say this to downplay evil and suffering in this world. In fact, he's experienced it. He's saying in verse 30, I've been engaged in the same conflict that you saw, that I had, and now here that I still have. And he's saying, I've suffered. I understand what evil is. I understand oppression. But he's saying, because you are an army, you are soldiers locked in arm with the purpose of actually moving forward in the gospel, you have no reason to fear. Of course, you do fear. But he's saying you really have no reason to. And I understand the Apostle Paul says, you see the conflict I'm in, you know my history, you know my sort of testimony, I've suffered with it, you're suffering in it, but you have no fear. And what Paul is saying in verse 30 when he says, I've been engaged in the same conflict, most likely what he's saying is this. It's a reference perhaps, as one example, to when he started the church at Philippi back in Acts 16, 11 through 40. And one of the sort of evangelistic efforts that he accomplished was that he exorcised a young slave girl from a spirit. And it's interesting, as he did this, the owners of that slave girl were upset because they were making money off this girl. And now they no longer can make money because the spirit left this young girl. So they created a sort of retaliation. They created a mob mentality. There was a riot. And now because of this, Paul and Silas were beaten, they were persecuted, all because they sent a demon out of this young slave girl, and then the owners couldn't make any money. And so they face persecution. And in some sense, the Philippians are doing the same thing because they believe in the gospel of Christ. See, let me make a side note about this, which is interesting. It may connect with us a little bit better in the 21st century. Some things never change in culture and societies. Even when you read about martyrs, it's not necessarily that governments or really people in power saying, I hate Jesus, I hate the gospel and Christians, so I'm going to persecute you. Now, certainly there is a level of that, but not really. In all cultures and all throughout history, some things never change. And I get this insight from Carl Trueman. He says at the end of the day, a lot of cultures, a lot of sort of institutions and societies, when you start disrupting or messing things up in that particular city, that's when you start getting oppressed. So money, sex, power, that's really the impetus as to why some people get persecuted and oppressed. So that was an example in Acts 16. It wasn't necessarily the message of the gospel. It was simply by the fact that Paul, in his evangelistic effort, saved this one girl, exorcised a demon. The owners were not able to make money, and that was the impetus for them to actually start a riot, create a mob, and the persecution ensued. See, something to keep in mind. If you disrupt sort of the social structures of this country, of this world, of the particular context that you're in, because you're propelled by the gospel, and that's a loaded sort of context, just realize that sometimes that will lead to a level of suffering, sacrifice, and maybe persecution. Not in the same way that we see here with Paul or Philippians. This persecution is more likened to really the Christian church in developing worlds and third world countries, but there is still a same sort of flavor of persecution, sacrifice, or suffering, if you're really compelled by the gospel. Because if you're really compelled by the gospel, sometimes you won't move up in the corporate world as much as you think you should. You won't make as much money as you think you should. You won't build relationships and connections in the same way that you think you should. Because if you're following the conviction of the gospel, there will be a level of sacrifice and suffering to some degree that you will have to sacrifice this for the sake of Jesus Christ. There will be a level of pushback because Christians ought to think differently about positions of power. Christians ought to think differently about how we use money and the purpose of money. Christians ought to think differently about relationships and sex. We think differently about it. And when you do, when you don't fit the cultural norm, don't be surprised that there's a level of pushback. I may open up a Pandora's box here, but I think this is food for thought. Carl Trueman again. You know, with the issues in this day and age with same-sex marriages, you know, it's a very, very prevalent topic in this day and age. And I just want to say this. I'm not trying to make a position. I do believe in heterosexual monogamous. I think that's the biblical orthodox position. But Carl Trueman makes this insight in terms of what he sort of predicts the future. He says, in decades past, the Christian thinking or worldview about marriage, heterosexual monogamous marriage, was considered by non-Christians as simply ignorant. No, those backwards, antiquated, non-modern people, they don't know how to think like in terms of a progressive nature. They just hold on to these old-fashioned, antiquated sort of principles and ideology, which is simply ignorant. That's how the culture viewed the church, according to Carl Trueman. But in this day and age, it's sort of transitioned. No longer is this sort of orthodox, what I believe, orthodox historic Christian position simply ignorant, but now it's actually to some people oppressive. It's a little bit elitist. It's a little bit angry. And if you move from ignorance to oppression, it's a different sort of context that we're in. It's one thing for people to think that we're just simply uneducated or ignorant. It's another thing for people in the culture to think that Christians are now oppressive. We're excluding people from certain rights, that we're not equating everybody with equality and the same sort of dignity. That's a different context, and he thinks that's the sort of direction that our church is in and going. So there is, if you hold on to certain biblical positions, will entail a level of sacrifice, perhaps a level of persecution. But the Apostle Paul is saying this. You want to live a worthy life? You got to live as a citizen of heaven. You got to live as an army who are arm in arm with one another. And you will face persecution and suffering, but you could face even issues like this with a sense of confidence, with a sense of calm, with a sense of security. And this brings me to my last point. How are we able to do this? How can I be so confident that arm in arm, side by side, we could face these sort of issues, whether we think differently about money or relationships or power or institutions, whether we think differently about this, how can I be so confident that we could face these sort of issues with a sense of calm? How can Paul do this? How can we do this? And the answer is given to us, I think, in verse 29. How do we do this? And it says this, read with me again. For it has been granted to you that for the sake of Christ, you should not only believe in him, but also suffer for his sake. So it's kind of weird. I wish we had time to really bring this out a little bit more, but Paul is saying this. Again, live a worthy life as a citizen of heaven. How? Live as a soldier of heaven. How? Live in unity and courage. You could face oppression. You could face persecution. You could face sacrifice and uncertainty in this world, in every aspect of your life, with a sense of cool and calm. How? Because in verse 29, God has given you a grace, and this grace comes in two ways. First, it gives you the gospel and faith in Jesus, and secondly, it gives you the ability to suffer with Jesus. Well, that's weird. I don't have time to explain it, but it says it right there, that according to the economy of the Bible, suffering in this world, in contrast to every other sort of worldview and thinking, other worldviews and thinking, they say evil and suffering is essentially a mirage. It's an illusion, or it's just simply something evil and bad that we can't reconcile. But for Paul, it's different. He's antithetical to the world, and he's saying this suffering that you will experience in following Jesus is a grace of Jesus. Wow. You're suffering, and it's the grace of Jesus. You ever think about it like that? And this is how you're going to be able to approach this. See, let me try to break this down very practically as we come to a close. Paul gives you the perfect balance and harmony here to face adversity and suffering, to live as a citizen. And that perfect balance is this. It's a perfect melding and harmony between being one at the same time humble, but also confident. That you're also confident, but you're also humble. So he's saying the reason we could face suffering is because you know the end of the story, that Jesus has defeated death and your eternity will rest in the city that is to come with heaven and worship. That's why you have nothing to fear. That's the reason why you could actually face adversity, because you know the end of the game. Sort of a silly illustration, but imagine for a second I say, you know what, let's play a game of checkers. And no matter how you may move the checker pieces, I will always let you win. Doesn't that give you a sense of, okay, no matter if I mess up, no matter if there's a bad move, I know that the end is already determined and I'm going to win. And then Paul is essentially saying this, in this sort of quote-unquote game of life, the end has been determined, the winner has been declared in Jesus, you're a winner with him. So that's why you could face the difficulty and suffering. That's why you could face the bad moves of your life, because the end has been determined. It may be hard, it may be difficult, but you could face it without fear because the end of the game has been determined upon the cross and resurrection of Jesus. But at the same time, it's also humbling because this victory is not something that you earn, but it's something that has been given to you. That's why it's a perfect harmony. You can have confidence because you know the end, but you can have humility because the end was determined not by you, but by Jesus. Does that make sense? That's why we can face all the adversity in life, because we look at all the grace that we receive, and we're saying, I could face adversity because in the end, I know that victory is mine in Jesus, but I'm also humble about it because this victory was completely and utterly accomplished by the person and work of Jesus. That's why in the gospel, you have a harmony of both being humble and confident, confident and humble. Tim Keller writes this to capture this idea very poignantly in his book, I think it was A Reason for God. And this is what he says, sort of a lengthy quote, but stick with me. He says this, when my own personal grasp of the gospel was very weak, my self-view swung wildly between two poles. When I was performing up to my standards in academic work and professional achievement and relationships, I felt confident but not humble. I was likely to be proud and unsympathetic to failing people. And when I was not living up to my standards, I felt humble, but not confident. I felt like a failure. I discovered, however, that the gospel contained the resources to build a unique identity. The gospel, the Christian gospel, is that I am so flawed that Jesus had to die for me. Yet I am so loved and valued that Jesus was glad to die for me. This leads to deep humility and deep confidence at the same time. It undermines both swaggering and sniveling. Do you understand what he's saying? See, for Tim Keller, he's saying this, when his relationships and his academic work and his ministry is going well, he says he felt good and secure and confident about himself, but it also breeded a sense of pride, a sense of like criticism to those who can't accomplish what he does. But on the flip side, when he didn't reach his standards on this spectrum, he felt humble, but not very confident, sort of insecure, self-deprecating. But he says to bring it together is really to look at Jesus. See, for Keller, it may have been academic work and ministry, but all of us sort of have that idea by which we base our lives on that causes us to swing. Let me try to illustrate it in this way. If you think that your security and your sense of self-accomplishment and worth comes from money, if you have a lot of money and you accumulated a lot of wealth and you're on the pride side, you feel good about yourself, you think you're a little bit better, you may actually criticize those who are not so good with money and don't make so much money themselves in their vocation or not really good and work hard and strive to actually be successful. You will be prideful and confident, but you'll also be very critical to those who don't have money. But if you swing on this side and say, well, I'm not as successful financially, so you're humbled because I don't make as much money, but then you look at these people and you're saying, I feel so insecure, I'm a nobody. No, I can't belong to anybody, I'm worthless. And that works with anything that you do. If it's education, you're saying, I went to the best schools, I'm intellectual, I'm organized, I'm gifted, then your confidence is over here and you feel very secure, but you're very critical. Critical of people who are not as smart as you or as educated as you or has not accomplished as much as you. But if you swing over here and saying, I didn't go to the greatest schools. I swing over here, I'm not as gifted as other people, not as charismatic. You may feel humble, but you're also very insecure, saying, I wish I could be like that. I'm a nobody. I wish I could be like that person who went to the best schools and get asked to be part of the best ministries and the best biblical or even business endeavors. You swing back and forth no matter how it works. If you're charismatic and you ground your identity and personality, you feel secure and prideful in that, but you criticize people who are awkward. But if you're awkward, you're saying, okay, I'm humble because I'm not that dynamic or important, but then you feel insecure because you're not that dynamic or important. But the gospel brings this together as a way to really face the adversity of life as a citizen in heaven in perfect harmony of humility as well as confidence, because you realize that the end of the game has been declared. You are a winner in Jesus. But that game-winning move on the cross is a complete, utter grace of Jesus Christ for you. That's why you can never feel prideful, because you didn't do anything to accomplish this. But at the same time, you can't feel insecure because you already have that reality in your heart, in your life. So if you look to Jesus, you can face adversity. You can be a citizen of heaven, a soldier for Christ. You can face all the fears of your life, the uncertainties of relationships and money, disease, children, how your children will grow up. You can face all these difficulties with a perfect blend of and harmony of confidence and humility if you look to the cross, because in Jesus you have been given the grace of victory and power, and that instills your identity and your sense of self-worth. So look to Jesus, my friends. Look to the one who did what you couldn't do, so that you in turn may be a light upon this world and a salt of the earth, that you would be a living example of the grace and the gospel of Jesus for the sake of the kingdom, that arm in arm together we can be the Spartan 300 as his church and move forward by a Holy Spirit empowered and protected mission of renewing lives in Orange County with the gospel and the historic Christian truths of our faith. Let us bow our heads in prayer. Father, we thank you, Lord, that although our hearts are always craving and seeking after a significance or worthiness of this life, that your word promises us that you have given it to us already in your Son, and that you are telling us how we could live this out. So I pray, Father, that we would continually live in a manner that's worthy of the gospel as citizens of heaven, that our identity and our sense of belonging comes from the belonging of your family and in the kingdom that is to come. And help us to live as a united and courageous army for the sake of the gospel in this world, into this culture, in such a way that we could be lights of the world and salts of the earth. And let us harmonize that ability in the gospel as we look to appropriate and embrace the gospel of Jesus, so that one at the same time we will be humble and yet confident, confident yet humble. We pray that you would do this for the sake of your kingdom in the name of Jesus Christ, in whose name we pray all these things. Amen.